A young black woman boards first class with a valid ticket, but is publicly humiliated and forced to move, simply because she didn't look the part. What the flight attendant didn't know: that same girl was the daughter of the airline's powerful CEO, and justice was about to land harder than the plane itself. The airport buzzed with its usual symphony of announcements, suitcase wheels rattling across polished floors, and the occasional laughter of families on vacation. Amid the hum of international travelers and bustling staff, 19-year-old Nia Morgan stood with quiet confidence, her passport tucked into a leather holder and a first-class boarding pass resting neatly in her hand. Dressed in a simple yet elegant olive trench coat and white sneakers, Nia didn't need labels or logos to command attention. There was something about the way she carried herself, composed, thoughtful, intentional, that made her stand out. Today was a milestone. After a year in the UK participating in an elite academic exchange program, Nia was finally returning home to the United States, where she'd be honored at a national scholarship banquet for students of excellence in STEM. This flight wasn't just about going home, it was about celebrating how far she had come. Her father, Charles Morgan, had insisted she fly first class. "You've earned it," he said. He was never one for extravagance, but when it came to recognizing his daughter's achievements, he didn't cut corners. Nia didn't argue. As she approached the gate for Flight 2283, the attendant scanned her pass with a smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Morgan," she said, gesturing toward the jet bridge. Nia thanked her politely and made her way down, heart racing not with anxiety but with excitement. She stepped onto the plane, her eyes quickly adjusting to the soft golden glow of the first-class cabin. Everything felt plush and serene. Velvet headrests, wood grain panels, and a subtle scent of citrus and clean linen filled the air. Several passengers were already seated, an older white man in a crisp business suit reading the Wall Street Journal, a woman in designer sunglasses sipping champagne. Nia gave a small nod of acknowledgement, placed her carry-on in the overhead bin, and lowered herself into seat 3A. She exhaled with quiet satisfaction. A flight. Attendant moved gracefully down the aisle offering pre-departure drinks. "Orange juice or sparkling water?" she asked, her voice light. But before Nia could respond, a second flight attendant appeared behind her. Her name tag read Marjorie Carter. She was in her early 40s, with a tight blonde bun, pressed uniform, and the kind of stare that scanned and sized people up within seconds. Her gaze landed on Nia, and didn't leave. "Excuse me," she said, her tone formal, clipped. "This section is for first-class passengers only." Nia blinked, caught off guard. "Yes," she said, reaching calmly into her coat pocket. "I'm in 3A. Here's my boarding pass." Marjorie took one glance at the ticket but didn't move. "You must have made a mistake. This area is reserved for full-fare passengers." Her eyes narrowed. "The economy cabin is that way." She gestured toward the back without even looking. Nia's voice stayed even. "There's no mistake. My seat is 3A. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." A few heads began to turn. The man in 2A lowered his paper, and a couple across the aisle exchanged glances. The tension wrapped around the row like a coiled spring. "I'll have to ask you to move now," Marjorie said again, her voice now steely. "Or I'll need to involve security." "Security?" Nia asked, stunned. "For sitting in the seat I paid for?" Her tone remained composed, but the disbelief in her voice was clear. "Please," she said again, gently extending the pass. "Just look again. It's first class." But Marjorie stepped back. "One moment," she snapped, and walked briskly toward the galley. Nia could feel her cheeks flush, not from guilt, because she had done nothing wrong, but from the weight of unfamiliar stares. She could sense the unease around her. One woman looked at her with sympathy, another with suspicion. Still, Nia sat upright, breathing slowly. This wasn't her first encounter with bias, but something about being reduced to a spectacle in a space she had every right to be in cut deeper than usual. Within moments, 2 uniformed airline staff returned with Marjorie, one of whom had a clipboard. "Miss," the man began, "we've received a report of a passenger in the wrong seat." "That's not accurate," Nia said evenly, pointing again at her boarding pass. "I'm seated in 3A. I booked this ticket weeks ago through corporate booking. I'm returning home from an academic fellowship. There's no issue here." The man reviewed her boarding pass for a beat too long, then whispered something to Marjorie. The whispers didn't help. The passengers were now fully alert, eyes glued to the unfolding drama. "Look," the man said, trying to sound diplomatic, "it would be best if you moved to economy while we verify things. If this is an error, we'll bring you back up. So you want me to give up my seat, move to the back, and wait while you decide if I belong up here?" Nia asked. "Even though I have the evidence right here?" "It's just procedure," Marjorie chimed in, a smugness leaking through her mask of protocol. Nia looked at her for a long second. "This feels like something else," she said quietly. "But I'm not going to argue on this plane. Do what you have to." She stood slowly, pulled her bag from the overhead, and followed the staff down the aisle. The walk felt longer than the plane itself. She could feel the eyes burning into her back, some confused, some pitying, others cold and satisfied. When she reached economy, she found a seat toward the front, stowed her bag, and sat down in silence. The cabin here smelled different. It was more crowded, more claustrophobic, more unwelcoming. She stared out the window for a moment before pulling out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She didn't want to worry her father, but she knew she had to tell him. She typed quickly. "They moved me. The flight attendant thinks I don't belong." She stared at the message, then hit send. The response came faster than expected. "Stay calm. I'll take care of it." Nia let out a slow breath. Her father was a man of few words, but immense presence. If he said he'd handle it, he would. And Marjorie had no idea what she'd just done. Charles Morgan wasn't just her father, he was the founder, chairman, and majority shareholder of the very airline she was flying. And unlike Marjorie, he didn't judge people by the color of their skin or the seat they sat in. Nia placed her phone down, adjusted her coat, and rested her hands on her lap. She had done everything right, and yet she'd still been treated like an imposter. But she wasn't angry. Not yet. She was waiting. Watching. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't be her who had to move. It would be the one who made the mistake of thinking she didn't belong. Nia sat upright in her economy seat, her coat neatly folded over her lap, the soft hum of the engines barely drowning out the sound of her thoughts. Her heart had settled into a steady rhythm, but the sting of humiliation still pulsed beneath the surface. Around her, other passengers chatted softly or scrolled through their phones, unaware, or woefully indifferent, to what had just occurred in first class. She stared ahead, not bothering to engage, her hands calmly folded, eyes steady. She had done nothing wrong. Her ticket was valid. Her seat was earned. But Marjorie Carter had seen her and made a choice. A choice rooted not in policy, but in perception. And now, that choice was going to cost her. 30 minutes into the flight, as the aircraft leveled out above the clouds, the captain sat in his seat reviewing flight data when the cockpit phone rang. The co-pilot gave him a quick glance. The call was unusual, priority status, routed directly to the flight deck. The captain picked up. Captain Wells speaking. The voice on the other end was calm, commanding, and unmistakable. "This is Charles Morgan. I believe you're aware of who I am." The captain immediately straightened. "Yes, sir." "Of course. How can I help you?" There was no pleasantry, no small talk. "There's been an incident involving my daughter, Nia Morgan, who is currently seated in economy. She was removed from her assigned seat in first class due to what your staff has called a mistake, but I believe we both know it was something else." The captain swallowed. I wasn't aware of the details, sir, but I can assure you I'll investigate immediately." "Good," Charles said evenly. "You'll speak with your lead flight attendant, Ms. Marjorie Carter. I want a full report." "And one more thing," he added, his voice low but firm, "I will be waiting on the tarmac when you land. I expect her to explain herself. Personally." The line clicked off. The silence that followed was thick with implication. The captain stood and walked to the galley with purpose. Passengers glanced up briefly, sensing something shift in the cabin's energy. Marjorie was prepping beverage carts with another flight attendant when the captain appeared. "Miss Carter." A word. Marjorie turned, startled. She followed him to the rear galley, away from the passengers. The look on his face made her uneasy. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to maintain her usual brisk professionalism. The captain didn't mince words. "I just got off the phone with Charles Morgan." The blood drained from Marjorie's face. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. His daughter is on this flight. In economy. She was removed from her seat in first class, by you." Marjorie's jaw tightened. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said quickly. "The passenger, Miss Morgan, she wasn't listed as VIP. Her attire wasn't typical for first class." You judged her," the captain interrupted coldly. "You assumed." Marjorie opened her mouth, but he held up a hand. "Don't explain to me. You'll explain to Mr. Morgan. In person. He'll be meeting us on arrival." That shut her up. The words landed like lead weights in her chest. She turned away for a moment, swallowing hard. Her mind raced. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a career-ending error. In a feeble attempt to repair the damage, she gathered a service tray and made her way down to the economy cabin. Her smile was rehearsed, her hands slightly shaking as she approached Nia's row. "Miss Morgan," she said, forcing a warmth she didn't feel. "Can I get you something to drink? Sparkling water? Juice? Maybe a warm towel?" Nia turned to her slowly, her expression unreadable. "No, thank you," she said calmly, her voice firm but polite. "Are you sure?" Marjorie asked, still standing awkwardly. "We also have snacks, or, I'm fine," Nia repeated. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of everything that had transpired. Marjorie stood there for a second longer, unsure of what to do with herself, then nodded stiffly and retreated to the front of the plane. Passengers nearby watched in quiet fascination. Some knew something had gone wrong. Some guessed more. But none of them said a word. Back in first class, Marjorie tried to resume her duties. Her hands fumbled glasses. She forgot drink orders. She dropped a tray of mixed nuts, earning a glare from a businessman in seat 1C. The other flight attendants began to notice her unraveling. "You okay?" one of them whispered. "Fine," Marjorie snapped, though her eyes betrayed her. She moved stiffly through the aisle, each step heavier than the last. Her mind ran in circles. Charles Morgan. The Charles Morgan. She had read about him in Forbes, seen him in leadership training modules, even watched his company address on a staff video years ago. She remembered his reputation, brilliant, fair, fierce. And now, she had offended his daughter. Publicly. Deliberately. Meanwhile, Nia sat in her narrow seat, her eyes out the window, the clouds below like waves of silence. She wasn't angry, not yet. But there was a storm building inside her. One that didn't scream or flail or demand attention, but one that spoke with the calm certainty of a woman who knew exactly who she was. She didn't need to argue. Her father's message echoed in her mind, "Stay calm. I'll take care of it." And she believed him. As the flight pushed into its final hour, the tension in the front of the cabin was a living thing. Marjorie was quieter, more reserved. She didn't speak unless spoken to. Every smile was brittle. Every movement calculated. The other attendants noticed and kept their distance. Word had spread, something had happened. Something big. In the cockpit, the captain made his final cabin announcement, voice smooth as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and return your seats to the upright position." But beneath the professional tone was a silent urgency. He had to land this plane and prepare for what was waiting at the gate. As the aircraft tilted gently into descent, Marjorie's stomach turned with it. She peeked down the aisle toward economy and caught a glimpse of Nia. Still calm. Still unreadable. And that frightened Marjorie more than any angry outburst ever could. She could feel the judgment, the weight of her mistake, bearing down with every tick of the altimeter. The wheels touched down with a subtle bounce, and a soft collective sigh rippled through the cabin. Passengers unbuckled. Phones lit up. Carry-ons shifted. But in seat 3A, where Nia should have been, there was only absence, and the memory of a moment that should never have happened. A flight attendant's prejudice had turned a celebration into a lesson. And now, that lesson was about to be delivered, loud and clear, at Gate 12B. Because outside, on the tarmac, a black SUV had already pulled up. Its engine idle. Its doors closed. But the power inside it? Unmistakable. The plane descended smoothly, cutting through layers of soft golden clouds as the city skyline emerged below like a tapestry of light stretching toward the horizon. Nia remained still in her economy seat, hands folded, gaze steady, her composure unwavering. She hadn't moved since Marjorie's failed attempt at an apology. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. Her father's words still echoed in her thoughts, clear, assured, and final, "I'll take care of it." As the wheels made contact with the runway, the gentle jolt was met with a silent anticipation that pulsed throughout the cabin, especially in the front where Marjorie stood rigid, her hands clasped so tightly behind her back that her knuckles were white. She'd fumbled service all throughout the final hour of flight, missed drink requests, trembling hands, broken eye contact. The other attendants whispered quietly to each other, wondering what exactly she had done to be summoned by name to the cockpit in the middle of the flight. She hadn't told them, of course. How could she? What could she possibly say? That she'd humiliated the daughter of the man who owned the very airline they worked for? That she'd pulled rank on the wrong passenger, guided not by policy or protocol but by pure, blind prejudice. And now, with every passing second, the reality of her mistake crept in like a slow, suffocating fog. The plane rolled to a stop, the soft chime of the seatbelt sign releasing passengers from their seats. Phones came alive with screens glowing, bags began to shuffle from overhead bins, and travelers leaned into the aisles ready to move. But in first class, it was different. Still. Quiet. Then came the change. The jet bridge hadn't extended. The door remained closed. Instead, the main aircraft door unlatched with a metallic hiss, and from the windows of rows 1 through 5, passengers began to murmur. A sleek black SUV had pulled up directly beside the aircraft on the tarmac, unusual, reserved only for top-tier personnel or emergency diplomatic access. No one boarded through the usual entrance. Instead, the aircraft's outer staircase lowered. The SUV door opened, and out stepped Charles Morgan, flanked by 2 senior executives from the airline's board, their suit jackets barely rustling in the cool breeze. Marjorie saw him through the front window and nearly dropped the tray she'd been holding. Her body froze. Her eyes locked on the man now walking toward the plane, power in each step, calm yet unignorable authority radiating from his every movement. Passengers craned their necks. Some whispered, others gasped softly. A few of them had put 2 and 2 together. The girl. The commotion. The phone call. The captain, now standing at the front of the plane, opened the cabin door and greeted Mr. Morgan with a nod of deep respect. "She's seated in row 9C, he said quietly. Charles nodded, said nothing. He didn't need to. As he stepped into the cabin, silence fell like a curtain. The murmurings faded. People straightened in their seats. Phones dropped quietly into laps. He passed through first class, his expression unreadable, posture upright, stride unhurried. Marjorie stood at the galley, frozen. As he passed her without a glance, her breath caught in her throat. He said nothing. He walked directly past her. Past the curtain separating classes. past the invisible barrier that had been used to divide them in the first place. And then, finally, he arrived at 9C. Nia stood when she saw him. "Dad," she said, her voice low but warm. Charles didn't say anything at first. He simply wrapped her in his arms, holding her with the care only a father can give. She closed her eyes for just a second. It wasn't about power now. It was about presence. The two executives standing behind him observed the moment respectfully. Then, without so much as a pause, Charles turned around to face the cabin full of silent onlookers. And slowly, purposefully, he walked back to the front of the plane. The atmosphere shifted. This wasn't just a father standing up for his daughter. This was the man who owned the airline making a statement to every passenger, every crew member, and every witness. He stopped just inches away from Marjorie, who now looked visibly smaller, her hands trembling at her sides. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low but resonating with absolute authority. "Your conduct on this flight was unacceptable." She opened her mouth, desperate to speak, to apologize, to plead for understanding. But he raised a hand, not to silence her harshly, but to make it absolutely clear he wasn't interested in excuses. "You judged my daughter not by her ticket, but by your assumption. You humiliated her, ignored procedure, and used your position to exert power in the most unprofessional way possible." Her eyes darted nervously. Passengers in first class stared at her now. No one said a word. "You don't know me, Miss Carter. But you've heard of me. And unfortunately for you, I now know you." His voice didn't rise, but its weight sank deep into the room. "You are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately." There was a pause. A beat of silence that stretched just long enough to feel seismic. And then came the applause. It started softly, seat 2A, then 2B, claps of relief, recognition, and justice. Then rose 3, 4, 5, until even economy passengers, those who had seen Nia's quiet strength throughout the flight, joined in. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't spectacle. It was something more powerful than all of that, a unified acknowledgement that something wrong had finally been made right. Marjorie looked down, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. But it wasn't just about shame, it was the realization that she had become the cautionary tale she'd never seen coming. Charles didn't wait for a reply. He turned to the captain and nodded once. "Have someone escort her off the plane," he said calmly. "I'll be handling the rest internally." He then stepped back into economy, placed a gentle hand on Nia's shoulder, and the two of them began walking down the aisle together, father and daughter, side by side. As they reached the front of the plane, Nia turned back for a moment. Her eyes scanned the passengers who had witnessed her humiliation, then her vindication. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply nodded once, as if to say, "This is what dignity looks like." Then she stepped off the plane. The black SUV door opened for her. As it closed behind them, the aircraft remained still, the energy inside forever changed. No one said anything as Marjorie gathered her things, escorted quietly by a junior attendant. No one offered her comfort. No one defended her. They didn't have to. The lesson had been taught. Justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it walks down the aisle in silence and commands the whole plane to listen. In writing the ticket they tried to deny, I wanted to shine a light on a truth that many live with daily but few speak about openly, the kind of quiet discrimination that hides behind uniforms, policies, and polished professionalism. What happened to Nia wasn't loud or violent. It was subtle, insidious, and all the more painful because of how routine it felt. It wasn't just a seat on a plane that was taken from her, it was a moment that should have been filled with pride and peace, stripped away by someone who looked at her and decided she didn't belong. But here's the lesson I hope lingers long after the final chapter: dignity is not something granted by others. It is something we carry within us, especially when others try to deny it. Nia never raised her voice. She didn't fight back with anger or aggression. She stood in grace, even when standing alone. And in doing so, she reminded us all that power isn't always about titles or money, It's about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone make you feel smaller than that. To those who have ever been overlooked, underestimated, or misjudged based on their appearance, your value isn't decided by anyone else's perception. And to those in positions of authority, remember this: how you treat people when you think no one is watching says everything about who you really are. Let this story serve as both a warning and a call to action. A warning to those who still walk in judgment, and a call to all of us to speak up, stand with, and make room for voices that have too often been dismissed. And to our beloved audience here at Us, Justice Stories, thank you. Thank you for tuning in, for caring about these stories, and for believing in fairness, truth, and accountability. Your support turns these stories into movements, and your voice is what gives them power. If Nia's story moved you, if it reminded you of your own experience or opened your eyes to someone else's, don't let it stop here. Share it. Talk about it. And always remember, justice isn't just what happens in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes, it begins in a single seat on a plane. Until next time, this is Us, Justice Stories, thanking you for listening, and reminding you that every story has the power to change a life. Maybe even yours.